The heavy deadbolt of the penthouse slid into place with a sickening, metallic thud. Dominic didn't yell. He simply leaned in, his nose brushing her jawline, inhaling deeply. "You look beautiful, Madeline," he whispered, his voice like crushed glass. "So why do you smell like Christian Gallagher?" The private elevator, ascending to the 72nd floor of the Manhattan skyline, was usually Madeline's sanctuary. Lined in mahogany and brushed brass, it was the portal that separated the chaotic, gritty reality of New York City from the impenetrable fortress of Dominic Russo. But tonight, the gentle hum of the elevator felt like the ticking of a time bomb. Madeline stood before the mirrored walls, smoothing the fabric of her custom emerald green wrap dress. She was a woman who took up space unapologetically, a lush, full-figured size 18, with soft, dramatic curves that Dominic treated like absolute religion. In a Mafia underworld populated by men who paraded around emaciated plastic socialites, Madeline was a striking anomaly. Her weight was something she wore with regal confidence, and Dominic, the ruthless head of the Russo syndicate, worshipped the very ground. Her designer heels walked on. He bought her diamonds that bruised her collarbones and silk that hugged every thick, beautiful contour of her hips. But tonight, beneath the expensive veneer of her Baccarat Rouge 540 perfume, a different, darker scent clung to her skin. Creed Aventus, the sharp, aggressive notes of pineapple, birch, and heavy musk. It was a rich man's cologne, but in their circles, it belonged to only one man, Christian Gallagher. Christian was the volatile, blue-eyed heir to the Irish mob operating out of Hell's Kitchen. He was also Dominic's most hated rival. Madeline raised a trembling hand to her neck, rubbing the skin frantically, praying the friction would erase the ghost of Christian's proximity. She had only been in the enclosed back room of the Polo Bar with him for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of hushed, terrifying negotiations to save the life of the man waiting for her upstairs. But as the elevator chimed, signaling her arrival, Madeline knew Dominic's senses were as sharp as the straight razor he kept in his desk. The doors parted. The penthouse was cast in the low, amber glow of twilight and crystal chandeliers. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sprawling view of Central Park, but Madeline's eyes immediately found him. Dominic was standing by the marble kitchen island, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had discarded his suit jacket. His crisp white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the edge of a dark tattoo bleeding up his neck. He was a lethally handsome man, all sharp angles and calculated stillness. "You're late," Dominic murmured. He didn't sound angry. He sounded dangerously calm. "Traffic on Fifth Avenue was a nightmare," Madeline lied smoothly, stepping out of her heels to sink her bare feet into the plush Persian rug. She kept her voice steady, projecting the calm, grounded energy that usually soothed his violent edges. "I told Vincent to circle the block while I finished up at Bergdorf's, but the parade traffic trapped him." Dominic set his glass down. The ice clinked against the crystal, a sharp sound in the vast, quiet room. He walked toward her with the slow, deliberate gait of an apex predator. "Bergdorf's," he repeated softly. He closed the distance between them. Madeline's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stand tall, throwing her shoulders back, letting her lush curves command the space the way he loved. When he reached her, Dominic's hands found her waist. His large palms flattened against her hips, his thumbs stroking the soft indentation of her stomach through the silk. It was a familiar, possessive touch that usually sent warmth pooling in her lower belly. Tonight, it made her blood run cold. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of her neck. Madeline closed her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt his chest expand as he took a deep, lingering breath. And then she felt him freeze. The warmth of his body instantly turned into a radiating, terrifying heat. Dominic slowly pulled back. His dark eyes, usually liquid and adoring when he looked at her, were entirely devoid of emotion. He stared at her for a long, agonizing 3 seconds. Then Dominic turned his back to her, walked over to the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse, and engaged the deadbolt. The lock slid into place with a definitive, metallic thud. He pulled the secondary security bar down. The penthouse was now entirely sealed off from the outside world. Not even his own bodyguards could get in. "Dominic?" Madeline asked, her voice cracking just a fraction. He walked back to her, bypassing her entirely, to head toward the wet bar. "You look, Madeline," he whispered, his voice like crushed glass. He poured himself a neat double of Macallan 25. "So why do you smell like Christian Gallagher?" The room spun. Madeline's perfectly manicured nails dug into the palms of her hands. "What?" she managed, forcing a look of baffled indignation. "Dominic, do not insult my intelligence," Dominic cut in, his voice suddenly dropping an octave. He slammed the crystal decanter onto the bar, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You reek of him. Creed Aventus and cheap Irish cigars. It's woven into your hair. It's on the collar of your dress." He turned around, leaning heavily against the counter, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the marble. "So I will ask you one more time. And Madeline, for the sake of the life we have built together, I suggest you tell me the absolute truth. Why does the woman I share a bed with smell like the man who put a bounty on my head?" The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. The sheer glass windows overlooking Manhattan felt less like a luxury and more like the walls of a terrarium. Madeline stood frozen in the center of the living room, feeling the heavy, oppressive weight of Dominic's gaze dissecting her. "I didn't sleep with him," Madeline said. The words tore out of her throat, desperate and raw. It was the absolute truth, but in the Mafia, infidelity was secondary to betrayal. Treason was the only unforgivable sin. Dominic let out a low, humorless laugh. He picked up his scotch and swirled it, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "If I thought you slept with him, Madeline, you wouldn't be standing there breathing. I would have already killed you both. No, you're too smart for a cheap affair." He took a slow sip. "Which makes this infinitely worse. What were you discussing with Gallagher?" Madeline's mind raced. She couldn't tell him the truth. 3 days ago, Madeline had intercepted a heavily encrypted flash drive delivered to their penthouse by a panicked courier. Dominic had been out dealing with a union strike at the docks. Madeline, who handled the front-facing legitimate philanthropy of the Russo family, had decoded it. What she found terrified her. Dominic's most trusted underboss, a man who had been a second father to him, was skimming millions from the commission's laundering front. But worse, the underboss had framed Dominic for it. The proof was irrefutable, doctored perfectly to make Dominic look like a rat stealing from the 5 families. The commission would execute Dominic without a trial. Christian Gallagher had the original, undoctored ledgers. He had reached out to Madeline through a burner phone, offering a trade. He would give her the real ledgers to clear Dominic's name, but in exchange, Madeline had to grant Gallagher's operation full access to the Russo's shipping routes in Port Newark. She had met Christian today at the Polo Bar to view the proof. If Dominic knew Christian had the ledgers, Dominic's pride and raging temper would dictate an immediate, violent street war. He would march into Hell's Kitchen tonight with his men, and it would be a bloodbath. Dominic would be killed before he ever got his hands on the evidence. Madeline was trying to secure the proof quietly. She was betraying his business to save his life. "I ran into him at Bergdorf's," Madeline lied, stepping forward. She softened her features, letting tears well in her eyes. "He cornered me in the VIP fitting room area. His men blocked the exits. He got too close, Dominic. He was trying to intimidate me to get to you. He grabbed my shoulders, and his cologne, it just got on me. I was terrified." It was a brilliant lie. It played on Dominic's protective nature. For a fleeting second, she saw a flash of raw, violent possessiveness cross his face, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by a mask of chilling indifference. "Is that so?" Dominic asked softly. He walked toward the massive glass coffee table. He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He didn't unlock it. He simply tossed it onto the table. "You know, Vincent is a very loyal driver. He's also a very observant one." Madeline's stomach plummeted. "Vincent noted that you went into Bergdorf's at 2:00 p.m., Dominic said, pacing slowly around her, his voice a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence. "But my security detail on the loading dock camera saw a woman matching your exquisite, beautiful figure slipping out the service exit at 2:15 p.m., wearing a trench coat and sunglasses. A woman who then got into an unmarked black town car." He stopped right behind her. Madeline could feel the heat of his chest against her back. "So," Dominic whispered into her ear, "I had my men pull the city's traffic grid footage. Imagine my surprise when I saw that town car drop my beautiful, loyal woman off at the back entrance of the Polo Bar, a restaurant that was entirely bought out for a private lunch today by the Gallagher Syndicate." Madeline squeezed her eyes shut. Tears spilled over her lashes, hot and fast. "Dominic, please, you have to understand." He grabbed her arm, spinning her around. His grip was tight, bordering on painful, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and profound heartbreak. "Understand what? That the woman I moved into my home, the woman I trusted with my life, is making side deals with my enemy." "I am trying to save your life," Madeline screamed, the truth bursting out of her before she could lock it down. Her chest heaved, her lush frame trembling under his grip. "You are being framed, Dominic. Your own men are setting you up for the commission." Dominic froze. The anger in his eyes didn't dissipate, but it shifted, turning sharp and calculating. He loosened his grip slightly, though he didn't let her go. "What are you talking about?" "The skimming," Madeline sobbed, refusing to back down, matching his intense glare with her own fierce defiance. "Millions are missing from the front accounts. The commission is going to put a hit out on you by the end of the week. Christian has the real ledgers that prove your underboss did it. I went to him to negotiate for them." She expected him to look shocked. She expected the betrayal of his underboss to shatter him. Instead, a slow, terrifying smirk spread across Dominic's face. He let go of her arm completely and took a step back, looking at her as if she were a puzzle he had just solved. "Oh, my sweet, naive Madeline," Dominic murmured, shaking his head. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic object, tossing it onto the coffee table next to his phone. Madeline looked down. It was the encrypted flash drive, the exact one she had hidden in the false bottom of her jewelry box. "You think you're playing the game," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a sinister, chilling whisper. "But you don't even know the rules. Did you really think I didn't know about the skimming? I orchestrated it." Madeline's breath stopped in her throat. The walls of the penthouse seemed to close in on her. You stole from the commission?" "I moved my own money to prepare for a war," Dominic corrected, his eyes locking onto hers with a predatory gleam. "I framed my underboss, and I let Christian Gallagher find those real ledgers. I needed Gallagher to feel confident. I needed him to think he had leverage over me, so he would finally come out of hiding." Dominic stepped closer, cornering her against the edge of the sofa. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb wiping away a stray tear. The tenderness of his touch was horrifying compared to the monstrous revelation. "I knew you were intercepting my mail," Dominic whispered, his eyes dark and entirely unreadable. "I let you find that flash drive. I let you go to Gallagher today. Because Christian is paranoid. He would never take a meeting with me. And he'd never meet with one of my soldiers. But you? The woman I am famously obsessed with? He couldn't resist the chance to turn you." Madeline stared at the man she loved, realizing she didn't know him at all. She had been a pawn, a beautifully dressed, heavily guarded piece of bait. "You used me," she choked out, stepping back from his touch, her whole body shaking. "You sent me into a room with a man who could have killed me. He wouldn't dare touch a hair on your head," Dominic said calmly, though a muscle feathered in his jaw. "I had 6 sniper rifles pointed at the windows of that restaurant. If he had so much as raised his voice at you, his head would have decorated the mahogany." He turned and walked toward the locked penthouse doors. "Where are you going?" Madeline asked, her voice panicking. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her. Dominic had orchestrated all of this to draw Gallagher out. But why today? Why now? "You did your job perfectly today, Madeline," Dominic said, not turning around. He placed his hand on the deadbolt. "You gave him a false sense of security. You proved that he has the ledgers. And because of the tracker, I slipped into the lining of your handbag this morning. I know exactly where Gallagher went after you left him." He unlocked the door. The heavy click echoed in the silent room. Dominic looked back at her over his shoulder, his face a mask of pure, lethal intent. "Lock the door behind me, Madeline. Do not answer it for anyone, because by midnight, the Irish syndicate will be ashes, and Christian Gallagher will be dead." The door opened, and Dominic stepped out into the hallway, leaving Madeline alone in the silent, gilded cage of the penthouse, the faint, lingering scent of Creed Aventus suddenly smelling exactly like a graveyard. The silence of the penthouse was absolute, pressing against Madeline's ears with a deafening weight. She stood frozen in the center of the lavish living room, her emerald green wrap dress clinging to her lush, full-figured silhouette. Dominic's footsteps had long faded down the private corridor, but the phantom heat of his touch still burned against her cheek. He had played her, the man who worshipped every thick curve of her body, who showered her in diamonds and swore she was his queen, had turned her into a disposable chess piece on his blood-soaked board. Madeline forced her heavy limbs to move. She walked over to the glass coffee table, her bare feet sinking into the Persian rug. The metallic flash drive sat there, mocking her. Dominic had left it behind, arrogant in his absolute victory. But Dominic, for all his ruthless brilliance, had a fatal flaw. He underestimated a woman scorned. Madeline snatched the drive. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She marched into Dominic's private study, a room bathed in the scent of rich mahogany and old leather. She booted up his encrypted terminal. The Rousseau Syndicate used sophisticated software, but Madeline handled their legitimate philanthropy. She knew the backdoor passwords. She plugged the drive in. The files populated on the screen. Dominic was right. The ledgers were tampered with, a masterful forgery. But Madeline didn't care about the money anymore. She dug into the root directory, her manicured nails flying across the keyboard. Christian Gallagher's organization had hidden a secondary, deeply encrypted folder within the drive's partition. It took her 10 agonizing minutes and a brute force decryption program Dominic himself had purchased on the dark web to crack it. When the files finally opened, Madeline's blood turned to ice. It wasn't just ledgers. It was a comprehensive federal dossier. Wiretap transcripts, surveillance photos, and signed immunity agreements. At the bottom of the screen was a signature that made her stomach drop. Damian Williams, United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Christian Gallagher wasn't just an Irish mob boss trying to overthrow the Rousseaus. He was a confidential informant, a high-level rat working directly with the feds at Foley Square to build a massive RICO case against the 5 families. Madeline stared at the glowing monitor, horror washing over her. Dominic thought he was walking into a triumphant execution tonight. He thought he was eliminating a rival. But if Dominic put a bullet in Christian Gallagher's head, he would be murdering a federal asset. The FBI would descend on the Rousseau Syndicate before sunrise. Dominic wouldn't just go to Rikers Island. He would be buried in a federal black site in Florence, Colorado, for the rest of his natural life. "He doesn't know," Madeline whispered to the empty room. Dominic was walking into a federal trap. Gallagher had lured him out, using Madeline as the bait, knowing Dominic's legendary temper and possessive jealousy would cloud his judgment. Madeline slammed the laptop shut. She didn't have time to process her broken heart or Dominic's betrayal. If she didn't act now, the man she loved was a dead man walking. She ran to the master bedroom, stripping off the emerald silk dress. She needed to move. She shoved her thick, gorgeous thighs into a pair of black denim jeans and pulled a heavy wool turtleneck over her head. She strapped on her black leather boots. Finally, she opened the false bottom of her jewelry box. The flash drive was gone, but her customized pearl-handled Glock 19 was still there. She checked the magazine, the cold steel grounding her racing thoughts, and slid it into her waistband. Dominic had ordered her to lock the door and stay put. He had taken his usual fleet of armored Escalades, but he had forgotten about the vintage 1969 Mustang Mach-1 parked in the subterranean garage, a birthday gift he had given her last year. Madeline bypassed the main elevator and sprinted down the emergency stairwell to the 71st floor, transferring to the service lift. Her mind raced, calculating the tracker's probable location. The Irish syndicate operate out of Hell's Kitchen, but Gallagher was too smart to meet Dominic on his home turf. He would choose somewhere isolated, somewhere industrial. The old Red Hook grain terminal in Brooklyn. It was a massive, decaying concrete monolith on the waterfront, a notorious dumping ground for bodies. Madeline revved the Mustang's engine, the guttural roar echoing through the concrete garage. She tore out onto the streets of Manhattan, the tires screaming against the asphalt. Rain began to fall, slicking the neon-lit streets as she weaved through the late-night traffic, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She was a woman on a mission, her voluptuous frame pressed hard into the leather seat, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of fury and desperate love. The storm broke just as Madeline crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. Thunder rattled the chassis of the Mustang. She pulled into the desolate, rain-swept industrial park of Red Hook, cutting her headlights a quarter-mile from the towering grain terminal. The colossal concrete silos loomed against the lightning-streaked sky like ancient tombstones. She spotted them instantly. 4 black SUVs were parked in a loose perimeter around the loading docks. Dominic's men. Madeline slipped out of the car, the heavy rain instantly soaking her hair. She drew her Glock, the cold metal slick in her grip. She knew the patrol routes of Dominic's soldiers. She bypassed the main loading bay, utilizing her knowledge of the architectural blueprints she had reviewed months ago for a potential real estate front. She slipped through a rusted side access hatch, the darkness swallowing her whole. The interior of the terminal smelled of damp concrete, iron, and the sharp, coppery tang of fresh blood. Madeline crept along the grated catwalk overhead. Below, in the cavernous main sorting floor, floodlights illuminated a brutal tableau. Christian Gallagher was strapped to a heavy steel chair. His face was a swollen, bloody mask. His designer suit was in tatters. Standing over him, illuminated in the harsh halogen glare, was Dominic. He had rolled up his sleeves, his tattooed forearms corded with tension. In his right hand, he held a suppressed tactical pistol, pressed firmly against Gallagher's temple. "You thought you could touch what is mine." Dominic's voice echoed up to the catwalk, low, lethal, and devoid of mercy. "You thought you could use Madeline." "Do it, Russo," Gallagher spat, blood spraying from his split lip. "Pull the trigger. You're a dead man anyway." Dominic pulled the hammer back. The metallic click was deafening in the cavernous space. "Dominic, stop!" Madeline's voice tore through the air, vibrating with absolute authority. Dominic's head snapped up, his gun still pressed to Gallagher's head. His men instantly raised their assault rifles, laser sights cutting through the dusty air, aiming directly at the catwalk. "Stand down!" Dominic roared at his men, his eyes wide with shock as he spotted Madeline's lush, imposing figure stepping out of the shadows. "Lower your weapons now!" The red lasers dropped to the floor. Madeline descended the rusted iron staircase, her boots clanging against the metal. She walked directly into the center of the kill box, entirely unfazed by the heavily armed Mafia soldiers surrounding her. She commanded the space, her thick, powerful curves outlined by the soaked wool of her sweater. She walked right up to Dominic, stopping inches from the barrel of his gun. "What the hell are you doing here?" Dominic demanded, his carefully crafted composure fracturing. "I told you to stay in the penthouse, Madeline." "And let you walk into a federal trap?" Madeline shot back, her chest heaving, rain dripping from her eyelashes. She didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled printouts from his computer. She slammed them against Dominic's chest. "Read it! Read it right now!" Dominic frowned, keeping the gun trained on Gallagher as he snatched the papers with his free hand. He scanned the first page, then the second. The color drained from his face, leaving his sharp cheekbones pale under the floodlights. "Damian Williams," Dominic whispered, the name dropping like an anvil. "He's a rat, Dominic," Madeline said, her voice dropping to an intense, urgent murmur. "A federal CI for the Southern District of New York. This entire night was a setup. I wanted you to find out about the ledgers. He wanted you to track him here. Because the moment you pull that trigger, the FBI SWAT teams waiting 2 miles away at the Gowanus staging area will breach this building. You kill him, and you catch a federal murder charge of a government witness. The Russo family dies tonight." Dominic stared at the documents, then slowly turned his gaze down to Christian Gallagher. Gallagher was grinning, a horrifying, bloody smile. "She's smarter than you, Russo," Gallagher wheezed. "They're already on their way. My wire has been broadcasting this entire conversation." Dominic's jaw clenched. The rage emanating from him was absolute. He raised the pistol, aiming right between Gallagher's eyes. "Dominic, no!" Madeline lunged forward, grabbing his arm. She used her substantial weight to pull his aim down. "It's not worth it. If you shoot him, you lose everything. You lose the Empire. You lose your life." She paused, voice breaking just a fraction as she stared into his dark, furious eyes. "You lose me." Time stopped. The rain battered the tin roof of the terminal. The distant faint wail of police sirens began to echo through the Brooklyn night. Dominic looked at Madeline. Really looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the sheer, unapologetic bravery of a woman who had driven into a Mafia execution to save the man who had used her as bait. In that split second, the power dynamic irrevocably shifted. She wasn't just his beautiful, protected queen anymore. She was his savior. She was his equal. Dominic slowly lowered the gun. He turned to his men. "Wipe the servers. Burn the vans. We leave through the tunnels now." Dominic grabbed Madeline's hand. His grip was entirely different now. It wasn't possessive. It was desperate. They sprinted toward the subterranean drainage tunnels, just as the blinding red and blue lights of federal armored vehicles breached the loading dock doors. They navigated the dark, damp tunnels in silence, emerging blocks away in a desolate alley. A secondary getaway car, a modest sedan, was waiting. Dominic pinned Madeline against the cold brick wall of the alleyway. The rain washed the blood and sweat from his face. He looked wrecked, utterly undone by what had just transpired. "You saved my life," Dominic breathed, his forehead resting against hers. "I used you. I put you in danger, and you rode into hell to save me." Madeline looked up at him, her heart aching, but her spirit unbreakable. "I didn't do it just, Dominic. I did it for us. But you will never, ever use me as a pawn again. If you want me by your side, I am your partner, not your bait. Never your bait." Dominic reached up, his large hands cupping her beautiful, full face. He kissed her, a bruising, desperate kiss that tasted of rain and survival. "My partner," he vowed into the storm, holding her magnificent, heavy curves against his body, as if she were the only anchor keeping him from drowning. "Only you, Madeline. Only you." Did you enjoy this thrilling dive into the dark, dangerous world of the Russo Syndicate? The line between love and betrayal is razor thin, and Madeline just proved she's the undisputed queen of the Empire. If this intense Mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who crave explosive drama and plot twists. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heart-stopping, real-life romantic thrillers every single week.